Hello, BookTube. Well, we're at it again. This is a federal holiday here in the United States, so there's no mail. I had 2 mail packages delivered very late on Saturday, and I wish that it had been 10. It would make this whole process easier, but we are rationing those 2 book packages. So we did one yesterday on a Sunday. There's no mail on Sunday. And we're doing one today because it's a federal holiday. And it's a lesson to me that many of you have underscored to me, many of you have quietly pointed out to me, and one of you from Iowa has not so quietly pointed out to me that if I were to set aside a few packages every week, I could handle Sundays easily, and we would just have a continuous mail flow. That is a good idea. I've heard that idea a few times over the years that I've been making these videos. I am now going to try to do that. So, for instance, tomorrow, Tuesday, the mail, the world starts up again. The construction guys will be there. All of the shops will be open. The transportation will be moving at its normal pace. And the mail will be bombarding Hyde Cottage. And it's a good idea. Tomorrow I will siphon a couple of packages from the mail. And I will do a couple of packages on Wednesday and a couple on Thursday and a couple on Friday. And that way on Sunday we'll have mail. And I will have a cushion against federal holidays. So, but as it is, as things stand, we're rationing. So we've got 1 package per day until the mail resumes tomorrow. So we've got this 1 package to do today. We did an interesting debut novel yesterday, something that was fascinating in its own right because the author paused for a long time between her debut short story collection and her debut novel. So now, what have you got there? What have we got here? Oh, okay. All right. Oh no, Bean. Did I give you a pub sheet? Bean, did I give you a pub sheet? No, I didn't. Okay, all right. That would have been World War III to get it away from her. Okay, I don't need a pub sheet for this though. That's all right. I heard about this from its publicist and was immediately intrigued. This comes out in March of 2020. And I'm going to want your help. I raised a question with the publicist, and I haven't given it any more thought. I went right to other stuff. But I want your help to see if we can come up with an analog to this book sometime recently. All the examples that I come up with are over 150 years old. This is a book that's coming out called Child of Light. It is a biography of the late novelist Robert Stone. And it's by Madison Smart Bell. And Robert Stone, I think, is fantastic. I think he's a great novelist. He's the last of his kind, really, in a way, or one of the last of his kind, a very traditional, old school. I hate to say it, but if you're familiar with his work, you'll know what I mean. I don't mean it as an insult, but he's a very masculine kind. He's a holdover from the masculine world of novel writing, where that was always an illusion, always a little bit silly, but where, men write these big, blockish, stolid, stoic 1940s and 50s serious novels. And the men who wrote those novels often were the least illusioned about the reality of that image. They knew perfectly well that their female counterparts in the novel writing department were writing the britches off them the way they have for the last 400 years. But nevertheless, Stone he's a bit of a tough sell in 2019, in current year. He's a bit of a tough sell. I love his work. I just love it. And this is a biography of him by another great 20th century author. This is not some academic who's been studying Robert Lowell, for decades. Although I think in this case, it is also that. It is also an academic who's been studying him for decades. But in this case, it's a great 20th century novelist writing a biography, a full-length biography, not an appreciation or a memoir or something like that, but a full-length biography of another great 20th century author. And I would love to know when the last time that was that happened. When did that last happen? Is there another example stemming from the 20th century? It's a little too early to know for the 21st century, but what about the 20th century? I just find that absolutely fascinating. I think, as I told the publicist, I think that's a talking point on its own for this book. It shouldn't be. I think the point here is to celebrate Robert Stone. And the publicist mentioned that there's going to be a Library of America, I think, reprinting of some of Stone's work, 2 of his novels in one book, maybe, or 3 in one book. I didn't chase down the details of that either, but of course in 2020 I will. That would be great. My own favorite of his novels is probably not going to be in any anthology. It's a big later novel that I really love, but I'm trying to remember examples, whether or not there's been another example of a great writer in the same genre writing a biography about another great writer in that same genre. Even if we extend it to, for instance, poetry. Although I'd rather not. I'd rather stick to novels. Has a novelist, a great novelist and short story writer in the 20th century, of the 20th century, ever written a full-dress biography of another great novelist and short story writer from the same century? I think that's fascinating. Although I will, when it comes time for me to review the book, I will leave that as a tiny aside. I promise I will not be obsessing about that by the time my review comes along. Instead, we will get, I will just deal with this book. So what do we have here? I don't have a pub sheet for you, but let's see here. Yeah, he's the author of Dog Soldiers and A Flag for Sunrise. Those are his 2 famous books, and I have a feeling that those 2 will be the ones in the Library of America volume. Let's see here. Robert Stone, who lived from 1937 to 2015, probably the only post-war American writer to draw favorable comparisons to Ernest Hemingway, Graham Greene, and Joseph Conrad. Notice something about that club. You see what I mean. Favorable comparisons, but also comfortable comparisons, because that was very much the world that he occupied, or at least seemed to. Very much that world, the wingback chair, the whiskey at supper time, that kind of extremely, for good or ill, you're not paying attention anymore. I've got a little raccoon running around the house here. For good or ill, that kind of extremely masculine world that's going to be in every review. Wouldn't be surprised if, I think this will probably get reviewed widely, and I wouldn't be surprised if reviewers all mention that. But if I have anything to say about it, they will. I have the ear of most of them. And it wouldn't be the first time that quite a few of them leaned on a few observations of mine in order to get their review off the ground. Bastards. Anyway, let's see here. He lived a life rich in adventure, achievement, and inner turmoil. He grew up rough on the streets of New York, the son of a mentally troubled single mother. After his Navy service in the 50s, which brought him to such locales as pre-Castro Havana and the Suez Canal Zone and Antarctica, he studied writing at Stanford, where he met Ken Casey and became a core member of the gang of merry pranksters. The publication of Hall of Mirrors, his superb New Orleans novel in 1967, initiated a succession of dark-humored novels that investigated the American experience in Vietnam. That would be Dog Soldiers in 1974, for which he won the National Book Award. Central America, which is A Flag for Sunrise, 1981. And Jerusalem on the Eve of the Millennium, which is Damascus Gate, 1998. That's my favorite of his books. That's the first book of his where I felt that he had outgrown the need to posture, which unfortunately afflicts not only all of his previous novels, but most of the novels of the men in the time that I'm talking about. Most of them, their besetting kryptonite weakness is posturing, which drives me nuts. That drives me nuts. As well, it should drive anybody nuts, because it's an effective weakness. And unfortunately, it continues. There's a core of exclusively male novelists today who are routinely considered our greatest living novelists. They're routinely called that, and they do a lot of posturing. In fact, quite a few of them have transmogrified posturing into their career, so that the writing is all posturing. And they aren't the first ones to do that. Norman Mailer did that long before they were born. But nevertheless, that strand in letters, especially American letters, has always bothered me, really bothered me. Because not only is that an empty and insecure prop on which to base a writing career, that kind of stupid, been to the zone. I've been in country, dude. Yeah, I'm a man. I've got man stories to tell. Not only is that a ridiculously flimsy thing to base a writing persona on, especially when it's a rigged game. I mean, those successions of accomplishments that I just read from the back of this book, dealing with Robert Stone, the reason why you don't have, well, aside from the fact that women are, mentally sounder than men, the reason why you don't have women able to rattle off those kinds of things in the mid 20th century is because they were banned from having those experiences. Well, that's not fair. Anyway, that still continues. We still have our cadre of literary posers, of literary posturers. And the reason that I like Damascus Gate for Stone is because it seems to have leached out of his system by then. Although even when it wasn't, even when it was foremost in his system, he's still worth reading, very much worth reading. But let's see here if we could continue. Somebody had to work hard on this cover copy, and I'm ignoring them in order to bloviate. An acclaimed novelist himself, Madison Smart Bell, was a close friend and longtime admirer of Robert Stone. His authorized and deeply researched biography is both intimate and objective, a rich and unsparing portrait of a complicated, charismatic, and haunted man with a sympathetic reading of his work that will help to secure Stone's place in the pantheon of major American writers. And you see there, what was it? Inner turmoil was in the first paragraph, haunted man in the second paragraph. What that means is alcohol. Those are always the euphemisms that float around for alcohol, unfortunately. And the reason I say unfortunately is because the readiness to hand of those euphemisms has for a long time prevented alcoholism from being seen as what it is, to the point where it is still considered an essential prop of being a writer that you ruinously overdrink. I once had a young would-be writer who went on to fame and then flamed out, of course, and became unable to sign a check, unable to keep his hand steady at the age of 40. But when he was in his late 20s, his mid-20s and late 20s, he actually said to me, "I'm a writer, therefore I drink." Utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. And one of the ways that's kept that whole cult going are euphemisms like inner turmoil and stuff like that, when what is meant here is crippling alcoholism that's encouraged by the myth of the American writer, especially the myth, again, of the male American writer. So all this stuff drives me crazy. And it made, and not to dig up an old horse and beat it, but it made the brouhaha that accompanied the start of this BookTube channel all the more bewildering and hard for me to deal with, where all of a sudden there are hundreds of people snarkily and bratishly and vindictively referring to me as a sexist. It made it all the harder because this stuff has bothered me in exactly this format for a long time, a lot longer than most of the people who are making those snarky little comments have been alive. I've been saying this is only to the detriment of the American literary world, and also that it's a lie that women were banned from having a lot of these tough guy male experiences that all these men have and then build their careers on. But women still had careers, and they still wrote the books, and the books are still better than their male counterparts. And every time that the woman is allowed to have the same experiences, the comparison couldn't be more damning to the man. And it invariably, you get the men in these literary circles will say, "Oh, well, I've had men in these literary circles in the back room of a certain old used bookstore in Boston. I have talked to these men, these writers, and they say, no, Sonny, no. It's all about the writing, okay? I wasn't against women having those experiences. They just couldn't. It wasn't my call. But if they'd had those experiences, the writing would still have told the tale." But every time the woman has the same experience as the man and then starts to write about them and obviously is doing a better job, what does the man do? He doesn't sit back and say, "Well, the writing will tell the tale." No, instead he goes to his editor and all of his editor's lunchtime friends and starts to poison the career of that woman, starts to torpedo the career of that woman, whether it's chronicling the highs and lows of the jazz age, if you're Zelda Fitzgerald, whose primary enemy and caretaker was her husband and ex-husband, or whether it's chronicling, men at war, in the fields of war, firsthand as an embedded reporter. Martha Gellhorn did a better job of that than Hemingway did, and when it was time for her to come back and transmute those experiences into fiction, her novels were better than his, and he knew it better than anybody, and did his best to make sure that though they were torpedoed. Hey, you want to do a profile on me for Look magazine? Well, I hear through the grapevine that you're commissioned to review, Gellhorn's new novel for the New York Times. for the New York Times Book Review. I'm not telling you to do anything here. I'm too much of a man's man for that. But if you praise her book, especially if you praise it in comparison to mine, well, that interview with Look Magazine might not happen. Now, that's $1,500 that you might need. Anyway, how did I get on this tangent? Oh, right, because we were talking about the euphemism, this haunted man, this inner turmoil. But the thing that fascinates me here, let me read you. There's a little block at the bottom here about Madison Smart Bell. He's an author of numerous novels, including All Souls Rising, nominated for the National Book Award and the PEN/Faulkner Award, and Freedom's Gate, a biography of the Haitian revolutionary Toussaint Louverture. He teaches writing at Goucher College in Towson, Maryland, and is married to the poet Elizabeth Spires. Now, I probably mispronounced half of those, but Madison Smart Bell, 2 of his novels are given here, but all of his novels and all of his fiction is great. Just great. A very, very strong case to be made. He wouldn't make it. Of course, he won't make it in press for this book. A very strong case to be made that he's every bit as talented a writer as Robert Stone. And here he is writing this guy's biography, and that fascinates me. I haven't touched the book, haven't dipped a toe in. I know that I will enjoy it because it's written by a great writer. Never mind that it's written about a great writer. It's written by a great writer. And what fascinates me is to know if that's ever happened before in writers who did the bulk of their work in the 20th century. That just fascinates me. I'm sure that I am neglecting an obvious example. It's just that none are coming to mind. And if you're doing your thinking, the bean is bouncing all around here. I'll see if I can. So there you are. Your fans don't care about me, Bean. They care about you. They're not listening to me. They haven't been for the last 20 minutes. Every time you make an appearance, that's all there is to it. Hey, Bean. How you doing? Oh, good. She's a vicious little raccoon. Don't you have packaging you can destroy while I talk to my imaginary friends? The point I was going to say is the bookish among you who might be going to mention some prominent critic, don't mention prominent critics. I'm talking about a major writer. Prominent critics are not major writers, much though we would dream of being them. We are not. I'm not talking about Malcolm Cowley here. I'm talking about if Fitzgerald had written a biography of Hemingway. That is sort of what this is. And I'm curious to know if you can think of examples like that. But anyway, oh God, look at I've actually made not only a video about one book in the mail, but a long video about Sorry, all right, I'll wrap this up. I think this is fascinating. I hope that it gets reviewed everywhere. I will certainly do my part. I will pitch it. But I won't read it. I'm not reading 2020 books until 2020. But that's fantastic. That is just great. So there you go. That is our one book. This is an easy Steve pyramid. It's just one book. That is our one book for this mail-deprived day. So I'll wrap this up. But I'll see you soon. We still have lots of other bookish stuff to talk about. We don't need the mail. I will wrap this up, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.